Welcome to Mr. E Defense Academy presents Concealed Carry Basics, Part 3, Handgun Familiarity. In this video, we're going to be looking at the handgun parts and operation for revolvers and semi-automatic handguns. Revolvers come in two different types, double action and single action, and semi-automatics come in three different types, and we'll talk about those. The three main parts of a handgun are the frame, the action, and the barrel. The frame is the backbone to which all other parts are attached. The action is the group of moving parts used to load, fire, and unload the pistol. And the barrel is a metal tube through which the bullet passes on its way to a target. So revolvers, single action versus double action. A single action revolver, it's referring to the trigger. So the trigger performs only one action, a single action. It simply releases the hammer, firing the pistol. Single action revolvers must be manually cocked. In other words, if it is not cocked, the trigger will do nothing. All the trigger does in a single action revolver is to release the hammer. A double action revolver, the trigger performs two tasks. It cocks and releases the hammer, firing the pistol. So a double action, not cocked, you can pull the trigger to cock it and keep pulling and it will release. So you can fire a double action revolver by simply pulling the trigger, whereas a single action revolver must be manually cocked and then the trigger just releases the hammer to fire the pistol. Here you can see an example of a revolver with the three main parts, the frame, the action, and the barrel. On the frame, in this particular one, we've got a few things. We've got the trigger guard, the front strap, part of the grip panel's there, the back strap, and the rear sight is attached to the frame. The action for this particular example is a double action revolver. You've got in the action the cylinder, which houses the ammunition, the trigger, the hammer spur that allows you to cock that hammer if you wish, the ejector rod, and the cylinder release latch. So in the action, for double action, the trigger. When the trigger is pulled, it activates the hammer, causing the firing pin to strike and fire the cartridge. The cylinder holds the cartridges in individual chambers arranged in a circular pattern. Each time the hammer moves to the rear, the cylinder turns and brings a new chamber in line with the barrel and the firing pin. And the cylinder release latch releases the cylinder, allows it to swing out so that cartridges can be loaded and unloaded. Single action revolver, the action is similar but just a little bit different. Still have an ejector rod, a cylinder, a hammer with a hammer spur and a trigger. The difference is there's no cylinder release latch. The single action revolver is loaded and unloaded by means of a loading gate. In this example, the loading gate is on the right side behind the cylinder. You flip open the loading gate and use the ejector rod to eject spent cases one at a time and load new cartridges one at a time as well. Revolver barrel. Generally, you've got a front sight attached to the barrel. The muzzle is the very front opening of the barrel, and the chamber in the cylinder with the cartridge. So you can see in this diagram the cartridge is in the cylinder lined up with the barrel, and in the barrel is what's called rifling, the lands and the grooves. So rifling are the spiraling of the metal in the barrel that allows the bullet, as it passes through the barrel, it gives it a spin, because a spinning bullet will travel much more straight than a smooth bore. And so within this diagram, you can see the lands and the grooves. The lands are slightly elevated or raised portions of the barrel, and the grooves are slightly lower. So you've got lands and grooves, that forms the rifling, which causes the bullet to spin. Now within the barrel, caliber refers to the diameter of the bullet or the projectile, which is measured in a firearm as the distance between the lands in a barrel. You can see that in the diagram here. So that diameter of the bullet, the distance between the lands, is what we refer to as caliber. Here you can see in this illustration, this picture, that here are some common handgun calibers. And you can just kind of get a glance at some of the different sizes. Calibers are usually measured in hundredths or thousandths of an inch or in millimeters. So for example, the 22 LR, .22 LR, or 22 long rifle, is 22 hundredths of an inch. The 45 ACP, 45 hundredths of an inch. The 380 is 380 thousandths of an inch. And then, of course, 9mm, the diameter is 9mm, and so on. So that's what we mean by caliber. Onto the semi-automatic. So the semi-automatic, the action, here you can see we've got the frame, the barrel, and the action. The action includes the slide and parts within the frame. So the slide, upon initial loading of all semi-automatics, the first cartridge must always be manually cycled into the firing chamber by retracting the slide, then releasing it. As the slide returns to the closed position, it removes a cartridge from the top of the magazine and inserts it into the chamber. Magazine is a storage device designed to hold cartridges ready for insertion into the chamber. The magazine release is a device that releases the magazine so that it can be removed from the pistol. The trigger, when the trigger is pulled, it activates the hammer or the internal firing mechanism, sometimes called a striker, which, when released, causes the firing pin to strike and fire the cartridge. The slide moves to the rear, ejecting empty cartridge case and usually cocking the pistol in the process. The cartridges in the magazine are forced upward by the magazine spring into the path of the slide, and when the slide, under pressure from a recoil spring, or a slide spring, returns to the closed position, as it moves forward, it picks up and pushes the top cartridge into the chamber. And it is ready for firing again. There are three types of semi-automatic handguns: single action, double single action, and double action only. Single action, the trigger performs a single task, which is releasing the external hammer or the internal firing mechanism so that the firing pin hits the cartridge. In other words, the trigger will not fire, it will not cock and fire. It only does one thing, just fires. The double single action, the trigger performs two tasks. It cocks the external hammer or the internal firing mechanism for the first shot, and then also releases the external hammer or the internal firing mechanism. After the first shot is fired, the movement of the slide on the ejection of the spent cartridge will cock the external hammer or the internal firing mechanism, and with the mechanisms cocked, all successive shots will be single action. So the first shot is double action, and then after that, it's the action of the slide cocks the pistol so that later shots are single action. So the first shot is double action, the rest of them are single action. That's a double single. Double action only, some semi-automatic firearms are set up so that the trigger will cock and release the hammer or the internal firing mechanism on the first shot and on all successive shots. So those are the three types of semi-automatic handguns.